I'm sorry for being a bit over time, but I own the next slot anyway, so I stole my own time. Right, do you want to introduce that? So, right. And ask me anything really means anything. And I'm happy if you ask in Russian. If you don't feel comfortable in English, ask in Russian, he will translate. So don't let that stop you from point. Yeah.
Hi. The video looks great, but I have some quick questions. What stops people using Zibi right now? What features, basic features, according to customers, not really implemented?
One of the easiest things to look at is the coverage, like on BPMN. So if you go to cv.io, there's the documentation, there's BPMN, and there's the BPMN coverage. And you probably know that the colors are not really on the projector. But if you know that from Camunda BPM, most of the things are orange, which means covered. And here, most of things are still black. So I'm not sure if you see that. This is orange, and especially for the events, basically a message, timer, but we don't have conditional. We're currently working on arrow. We don't have signal yet. We don't have compensation yet. So there are a lot of things not yet covered. So that's one of the reasons why you probably don't want to move there. On the other hand, and also in cockpit, like in the operate, you don't have the same features yet. You can't, migrate a version, or you can't do this and that. So there are a lot of things not yet there. Which normally means that's okay if you have a use case where CB fits perfectly, but if Camunda BPM does as well, it's much easier to go with that. That's different. Yeah. Do you want to have mine for the question?
Чем вы лучше, чем Арис?
Что?
Арис.
What's the difference between Camunda and Aris?
Aris? Okay, so Aris is basically, how to say that? I would say a drawing tool, which is probably much less than it is, but it's for modeling, for documentation, for getting whatever requirements together. And for us, the important thing, what we focus on, is execution. So we're an engine. Aris doesn't do that. We have a couple of customers which try to get the round trip running of having BPMN in Aris synced with what they execute, for example, in Camunda BPM. That's something which you at least could do. It's not totally easy, to be honest. There are a couple of glitches on the way, but that's kind of the connection. So it's totally not comparable, I think. Very different domain of tools. Oh, yeah, right. I forgot to mention that there are T-shirts for very good questions. We have, I think, 5, right? And if we get a really good question, I would throw in my own T-shirt. That's not very good.
I will take one.
That was kind of a...
So in cloud native infrastructure, you must cover all things about runtime scaling, service mesh, and other things. How would ZP cover runtime scaling?
So the question was how CB covers runtime scalability, right? Yeah. So the basic idea is really, it's this slide, more or less, or a combination of 2 slides. This one. No. This one, basically. So
I just need to add partition.
Right. So if you add partitions, you have more of these like single workers here, single threads doing work. And that means you can add partitions as long as you still have cores that can do work. And that means if you add nodes to your clusters, you have more CPUs, and that means you can do more partitions. That's the trick. We just had a blog post where we showed that. And we actually, because we do a lot of testing at the moment, a lot of benchmarking, ZB blog, there. There we go. Where's the result? There's the result. So that's the important thing here, actually. That's more or less the figure we wanted to have, right? So if you add brokers, new nodes to your cluster, and you increase the partitions accordingly, right? Then you can, the number of workflow instances per second increases like really linearly. And that means you can scale. You just add nodes, and then it scales up. It's not like in Camunda BPM, you can add nodes, but at some point in time, the database gets the bottleneck. And then it can probably make the database bigger to some extent, but at some point it still stops, right? And then you probably have what people do. We have customers using that in big scenarios. They have a second database, like sharding the database, but they have to add all that logic yourself or themselves. And you don't have that limit here. You just add nodes, and then it scales up. Yeah. I mean, you can also ask questions around like Camunda BPM if you like, or Camunda, or whatever.
What is the community version and enterprise?
For CB or for Camunda BPM? For CB, so currently in CB one thing is probably interesting. I talked about the license early on, so that's the first thing which is different to Camunda BPM. And the second thing that's different, the operate, the tooling, which is used for operations, it's available, but it's not free for production usage. So the Enterprise Edition gives you a license where you can use that for production. And of course, all the additional things like support and so on and so forth. Right? In Camunda BPM, it was kind of, we had parts of the cockpit enterprise only, and they were only available with the test license. And here the difference is you immediately have cockpit, operate, it's there. You can download it, you can play around with it. In development, it's no worries. But you're not allowed with that license to put it in production. That's the Enterprise Edition.
So the only way to implement the task is to develop a client. Am I right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So what do you have? Do you have each microservice implement its own client, or do you have microservice that aggregates clients per specific domain? What should I do?
That's an architecture question. Both technically, you can do both. So just to check if I understood you correctly, so one approach would be that you have CB, and then you have microservice A and microservice B, and they both connect to CB, right? That's one way of doing that. The other way would be I have whatever microservice A, which also defines the workflow, and then there you have all the workers running, which know, hey, if I need to invoke microservice B, I do a whatever REST call or send out a message or whatever, right? And both is technically both is fine. It depends very much on what you want to do. Like the first, like every microservice is connecting to CB is technically much easier to do, but it puts CB in a very central position. And that depends on if you want to allow that or not. I know a lot of companies which don't feel comfortable with that. They want to have their messaging as whatever central thing, or probably REST only, but not something like CB. But it's still the easiest approach. The other thing is possible as well. It's much less, let's say, invasive to your enterprise architecture, because you have one microservice. It just simply uses CB because it's easier to do than anything else. So does that answer the question? You don't look convinced yet.
Which approach do you suggest?
in my situation, I normally try to understand the situation on the customer side in the project and then recommend what fits there. So there's not a general answer. If I have a green field and if I could really make a totally free choice of what I want to do, I would probably go for having CB and then the microservices connect directly to it, because I remove the burden of having additional messaging, for example. So it's easy to get started. And I'm personally very confident that CB will work. But that's a greenfield thing, right? It might not fit in your situation. If I'm at a customer and I see that they already have messaging, for example, or they leverage Kafka for all their communication, I would keep using that. It's much easier then to get going. So it's always trade-offs. There's not an easy answer.
Okay, thank you for response.
We have one there. Oh, you're in the black. No, the next.
Thank you for the speech. Does CB have libraries for testing?
Say it again, sorry.
Does CB have libraries for testing?
For testing? Nothing specifically yet, no. So, I mean, you could run kind of a unit test thing, but there's no specific support like in Camunda BPM, like whatever, all the assertions and these kind of things. That's one of the things you asked it earlier, where also the maturity is not like Camunda BPM, so it's not yet there, no.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Do you have any roadmap for this testing and also for the BPMN coverage?
For BPMN coverage, yes. For testing, there's nothing concretely on the roadmap. What's probably interesting to understand is how we do roadmaps or how we do planning. So we normally plan like internally in terms of what we really do in the next quarter. That's what we kind of internally commit on. And then we have a couple of external commitments which might extend that, like with certain customers we do agreements like we need that feature till whatever Q2 2020 or something like that. But whenever we don't need to commit, we try to avoid commits. I mean, it's much easier to keep flexible to react on situations. And for testing, there's nothing on the roadmap. I have it in my mind that we need to tackle that sooner or later. But we always try to look at the customers and the community and the forum and the Slack channel, what people ask. And actually their testing is not a big topic at the moment, it seems. BPMN coverage is. And there are a couple of things like error events, sub-processes, which are currently going on. There's a roadmap page on the CB homepage where you can see at least a bit of the next steps. You had a question, I give you my mic.
How many corporate customers do you have now in Russia?
So that was a question for Camunda BPM. Enterprise customers in Russia? That's a good question. Is Marian still here? How many enterprise customers do we have in Russia?
So we have enterprise customers, we have actually two only.
Two.
How many open source?
Okay, yeah. But that's always the thing. Like we have a lot of open source users. I mean, a lot of people are here as well. And we have, that was, for example, a big surprise for me, LinkedIn. Okay, LinkedIn is not a big thing in Russia, but they're talking at the CamundaCon, that's our own conference taking place in Berlin next week, where we have around 500 to 600 people attending, and they handed in a talk, but they're not enterprise customers, and they're using it quite a bit. So we have a lot of users we don't even know, and especially I think in Russia or also in Asia, we have a lot of open source users where we have no idea. For enterprise customers, as you said, two, and you should know. So,
Is it secret?
I don't know. So we have reference enterprise customers in Russia. Yeah, probably the one conversation that's.
When you sign a contract, there is also one point, where the customer say you would like to.
Yeah.
Reference or not.
That's the other big thing. A lot of customers are not reference. But it's not our strongest customer.
From one customer can
You had a question.
Is Elastic exporter is part of enterprise license?
Say it again. Elastic I got, and then
Elastic exporter is part of enterprise license.
it's also it's supported, but it's also in the community edition. So it's also in the open source
Okay.
edition. And it's actually that's kind of the let's say the community way of get going. So if you don't want to go for enterprise, so if you don't have operate in production, you still have the export to Elastic. So you're not blind of what's going on. You could build a couple of whatever Kibana dashboards in order to see what's going on. You can build your own stuff on top of that. That's the way of get going with the, let's say, pure community edition.
I have a question
Yeah.
about Camunda and the Git. Actually, Camunda is a good developer tool, but it's also a good tool for analysts. And what about ZD? This plant is a high-tech tool for developers with all modern technologies and with all this cloud. Or it also will be like Camunda for both sides.
It's the same. I mean, if you look at it from that perspective, C is kind of the engine. It's the workflow engine. That's kind of the Camunda engine as well. That's one part of the whole platform. So CB is kind of another engine, but the overall ecosystem is the same. So we have things like Cabimo for modeling. We have the modeler. We have a couple of things. So that's we have operate. So operate will be able to read data from CB. So the whole ecosystem will also integrate with CB as it does with the Camunda engine, as you know from today. So I would say yes, definitely it should be. It's the same vision. It's a different engine underneath, but it's the same vision.
So it will be the same purpose, the new updated product for this more cloud-oriented, with more scalable technologies,
Yeah.
which was not available because of database bottleneck in Camunda. It's not actually a bottleneck, it's very fast, it's very good, but Z is much faster and much better as an engine.
Right. The much faster, it is much faster, but I think that's not the most important thing. The scalability is the important thing, right? And the cloud native, we have customers approaching us with, relational database, that's a problem. We don't have that in our architecture. It starts to be like that. But sometimes for no really good reason, but I mean, if they don't have relational database, they don't. So cloud native is kind of the thing.
Yeah, and I have one question about Camunda.
Yeah.
Sometimes ago I saw one thing. We can use expression language in the user task naming.
Yeah.
But we can do it for service task. Is this a special behavior or not?
What exactly, like?
We can use expression language in user task naming. We can use some variable.
And service tasks not?
But we can have for all activities only for user task.
Okay.
Maybe this is a special behavior, no?
Two answers to that. The first is, I'm not sure if it's like that. If you say that, then it's probably true. We could check. I mean, we could check the implementation. But I could imagine that it's like that. The reason we specifically have it for user task is the task list. Because very often we show the activity name in the task list, and then it could be like whatever, application for, and then you fill in the name for the person, and then it's directly part of the type. That's the reason why we definitely have a user task. Probably spontaneously, or we have expected that we have it everywhere then, but if you say it's not like that, then it's... Yeah, keep going.
We use our history audit, and for example, if we have some security IT, we want to see the activity step, and we need to identify this step. And
Probably takes longer than
Okay, no
a
problem.
half minute, but somewhere in that area you can look at the BPMN parse class. That's quite a huge class, part of everything. And then the behaviors, like the user task behavior. That really describes what that activity does. And normally, if you look at that and, for example, compare to the service task behavior, you normally see where it's implemented. And you see that there's a hierarchy, And if it's not like in the super class, but in the user task behavior, then it's there. You can open a feature request.
Yeah,
or
maybe
request.
I can do something like this.
I mean, yeah, no. There are normally workarounds what you could do, but that depends probably on how you exactly need that information. So, but very often the workarounds are a bit like you add what we call parse listeners. So they're called when we read the BPMN file, and whenever we see a certain task, like a service task, for example, we could say, okay, then add that listener whenever you enter it, and then you write some data somewhere or whatever. These are typical workarounds what you do, but it depends on the situation.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
У нас с YouTube есть какие-то вопросы? Ходи.
Вы мне понадобитесь. У меня 3 простых вопроса. Как вы считаете, может ли использоваться Camunda для автоматизации тестирования, скажем, веб-приложений?
Can we use Camunda for automated testing for web applications?
For testing web applications.
Testing web applications.
So you want to use the workflow engine to drive the test cases? Yeah. I just no. I mean, yes, you can always do everything basically. I'm normally thinking about 2 things. The first is, do I know other people doing it? And the second is like, do I think it's useful? And the first, I don't know. I know a couple of people using it for kind of CI pipelines, like really pipelining, where you run the test case, deploy, and so on and so forth. But for pure testing, I don't think I know anybody. Does it make sense? Is it stateful? That's normally a thing where I ask myself, like, what can I do with it? I can do activities in certain sequence and store them persistently, so it's stateful. Do I need that for back testing? Probably not.
Есть еще, мне кажется, что нет смысла использовать Camunda для тестирования, для того, что вообще, в принципе, тестирование может быть описано,
Второй вопрос, может ли она быть использована, ну, скажем, для бактрекинга? Как бактрекинг?
Can Camunda use as a backtracking software?
As a what?
Backtracking software.
Backtracking. I mean, again, like if you look at something like Gyro, what they have is a workflow internally as well. So you could definitely do some kind of this workflow with Camunda, but you have to build the other things around, like where do I store the ticket information and all the data. So that's probably a lot of things you have to do. And then, I mean, if you build your own Gyro, if you really want to do that, you could use that for a workflow part, yes. I just wouldn't do it unless I want to provide like ticketing systems and other customers. Then
И третий вопрос. Можете привести пример каких-нибудь 2-3 бага Camunda, которые исторически по каким-либо причинам не получается победить?
yeah, I still hear you.
Тут свои баги показывают.
Can you speak about 2 or 3 Camunda bugs which is still there from the beginning?
bugs which are there still since the beginning? Well, good question. We could find them easily in Jira, I think. Not out of the top of my head. I mean, there are a couple of inconveniences, like, for example, the configuration part. We're reading an XML file which is parsed by string and a couple of things, and very often you need that, but it's hard to get around. So these kind of inconveniences are always like, every time you see it's like, ooh, but it's not like, the pain is not big enough to do something about it. Bugs. I don't recall like a really severe bug.
What about inconveniences?
Yeah, there are a couple of them, but I don't recall any bigger one off the top of my head. Or we can find them in Jira, I'm pretty sure. It's open. Yeah.
And what do you think about the configuration for Camunda DB, but for history, different configuration for history method? Yes, because we have default custom event history event handler. Yeah, and for example, I don't want to write my own history DB handler, but want to use different DB
for the history.
Yeah,
okay.
What do you think
So
about
you read this. So what you want to have is basically saying, okay, I have my runtime data in that Oracle whatever instance, and I want to have the history data over all that. Yeah, that's asked regularly. It's not that easy to do actually. So it's not supported out of the box. I mean,
thinking about this, yes?
Yeah, we're thinking regularly about that. But there are a couple of things in the architecture making that really hard to implement. As always, not impossible, but it's a matter of effort. Don't expect that to change. I mean, if you look at CB, for example, we did it very, very differently from the beginning. Then it's easy, but with the current architecture, how we rely on transactions, how we handle the database, it's pretty hard to do.
Thank you.
We will ask me who asked good questions. I totally forgot. Did you keep track? I hope so.
Мы заканчиваем тогда. Сейчас вручение футбола за лучшие вопросы. Кто у нас? Люди, которые задают лучшие вопросы. Ну, now the time present our t-shirts for the first questions. So let's see.
This is a jury for the.
Yeah.
I mean,
this is actually for robots and 3 documents. But we don't have questions. No, so we have only 3.
but then it's. I mean, it's tight. You can wear it.
Okay.
Do you already have a T-shirt? Because you also gave a talk and you asked a lot of questions. Yeah. Fine. We can turn it around. Who wants a T-shirt? Does anybody? I mean, nobody wants it. Everybody has.
Okay. I think this guy with his questions was good.
Perfect. Can I throw it? I always try to practice my. Sorry. Yeah, definitely. The R is. You definitely. Right. I didn't look at the size. Is the size somewhere? Oh, wow, small. Do we have anybody for small? Why do we do small? Small? I mean, this is M, just for your reference.
M? Here?
M is good. M is good size.
M. So the cool, t-shirt.
And these are these for girls.
I can get one for my wife.
Ah, awesome. Any more girly shirts for wives, daughters, friends? Or, yeah, awesome. That was
And two M5.
We have a small. Oh. Anybody interested? Where there was a question? You get the second. We have two left, right? This was quick. That's a good question. Awesome. So, I think that's
Almost
almost done.
If someone have any questions to others, any other question about organization, something else, we have 5 minutes to finish this event.
Let's go quick. But I don't have to run. I mean, we can still gather outside. Thank you for coming.